Enter Paranormal M, where the eerie becomes reality. Subscribe and enable notifications to keep up with our latest spooky mysteries. Get ready for a supernatural experience, a guardian angel, and many others. In 2001, I was 3. I was an only child at that point, and my parents and I lived in this rent house that my mom still lovingly refers to as the shack. The shack burned down only months after we moved, but it was a good house as far as I remember. It was old and small, but it was where I spent my first 5 years, the good years, before shit hit the fan. It had a concrete slab of a front porch where I'd draw the sidewalk chalk, and it had a living room with a heater. I'd use that to warm my toes in the morning before preschool. There was a ledge on the bathtub where I'd stand to brush my teeth, and the single bedroom had been walled off partially to make my room big enough for a twin bed and a bookshelf. I had a dinosaur blanket, and I was really into dinosaurs back then. I don't remember much, just little details like I shared with you. I remember my mom and dad, and I remember the others. The others couldn't be seen by anyone except for me. I would catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, and they were always turning around a corner, ducking behind the couch. They acted like they didn't want to be seen, except for Tommy, who was different. He was a middle-aged man with a dark blue suit and brown hair, kind smile. Tommy had the nicest smile that would wash away any bad thought or feeling I had. He was good. He was always a good one. He wasn't there all the time, but I saw him and played with him enough for my family to become acquainted with the idea of him. He was my imaginary friend. I was a lonely only child. I had made a friend of my own to play with. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except I did have a friend, a real friend, one that was alive and in the flesh. For the sake of the story, I'm going to call him Daniel. It was around 2003, and Daniel lived next door. Between our houses was a field of tall grass with a path down the middle. We lived in the middle of nowhere in a shack, so our parents would have to walk us over when we wanted to play. I remember the last time Daniel played at my house, and shortly after he stopped playing with me altogether. We were in my small bedroom playing with Lincoln logs on the floor. Nice. Remember the ones you could fit together and build log cabins? Or anything, by the way. Anyway, Daniel was laying on his stomach, and Tommy brushed his leg when he was trying to come into my room. Daniel looked up at him with fear in his eyes. I wasn't sure why, but Tommy was a friend, and he wasn't anyone to be afraid of. I told him, "Scoot over, Daniel, so Tommy can play too." Daniel screamed and ran out of the front yard, demanding to be taken home. My parents laughed when they heard the story and said I must have freaked them out by talking about my imaginary friend. I stood in the doorway with Tommy behind me. Daniel stared at the door, but not at me. I watched his eyes. They were fixed well above my head. And one thing was certain that day. I was now not the only one who could see Tommy. At the end of 2003, my parents told me I was going to be a big sister. I was so excited, and they also told me that we'd move. They already had found a house for us. This house barely holds the 3 of us as it is, my mom said. There's no room for a baby, too. A couple of months later, they closed a house in a small town nearby. It was less of a town and more of a community. One main road, a couple of hundred houses, a tiny school, and 2 churches. There was one amazing thing, though. My best friend from T-ball happened to live right next door. Maddie. I'd hit it off with them the year before, and so did her mom's. I believe Maddie's mom was the one who told mine about the house being available in the first place. We moved in, and I was having the time of my life living next to my best friend. We'd both be at each other's houses daily. We were also in the same kindergarten class. And as a side note, our houses were maybe 50 feet apart from each other. They had been on the same plot of land that was later split, and that will be important later. I'd been a little bit worried about moving because I didn't want to lose my friend Tommy. And sure, he made Daniel run for the hills, and I was the only one who could see him most of the time, but I didn't want to move houses and never see him again. My parents had only said the three of us were moving. They hadn't said anything about bringing Tommy with us. When I asked, they laughed it off. When I told Tommy this, he just smiled and placed his hand over mine as if to say, "I'm not going anywhere." The new house was strange. You could feel it from the yard. It's like the AC's on and you could feel it from the crack around the door. Except it wasn't cold air, exactly. It was just bad. Didn't make you shiver, though. Maddie's house was the same. We talked about this just the other day, and there's 3 entities that we can specifically remember between her 2 houses. One thing I liked about Maddie was that she saw them all like I did. I felt way less alone. To this day, she's one of my best friends, and we still talk about how bizarre her childhood was in those 2 houses. The entity was the little girl. The little girl mostly stayed in my house. She never wanted to play and always seemed sad. When Maddie and I played in the yard, we would see her watching us from the window. We'd beckon for her to come out, but she would always shake her head and put back the curtains. She never spoke. She was harmless, though, but she was as scared as we were of the Twisty Man. The Twisty Man, we believe, was attached to the greater plot of land that our houses sat on. He was seen in both houses. The Twisty Man is hard to describe. I think of a Dementor in Harry Potter. Sounds stupid, but it would take away all the happiness and you'd only feel fear. He was all twisted and contorted, and a couple of times we looked like we'd caught him in the ceiling fan, swirling around in the ceiling above our beds. He was the color of a fresh bruise, blue and black and nasty looking. Didn't have a face, only a twisted sort of silhouette. He never spoke, just stayed long enough to give us nearly a heart attack whenever I saw him. But it was never really long before I saw Tommy too. He would stand in front of it, holding my gaze until it went away. Staring at this man I'd known for as long as I could remember, the happiness came back and the fear melted. The bad thing sank back into the walls. My sister saw the Twisty Man as a toddler, and Maddie and I saw him several times, both together and apart. I'd honestly all but forgotten him until Maddie told me what happened about a month ago. Maddie's ex-stepbrother lives in her old house now. Her stepdad and mom divorced, and he got the house years ago. But he's since given it to his son. Maddie's mom got a call from her ex and thought it was kind of weird. They are civil, but not friends, who called to chat. This information comes from Maddie, whose mom called her right away. The ex called Maddie's mom and asked, what was that thing Maddie said that she used to see in the house, that thing that she was so scared of? Maddie's mom said, "You mean that thing she called the Twisty Man?" Thought so. Apparently, the ex-stepbrother noticed that the neighbor who lives in my old house is sleeping in the driveway in a camper van. He thought it was weird that a 40-something-year-old single guy wouldn't sleep in a house he's paying a mortgage on. So he asked him why he was staying outside. The man told him, "I don't even know how to say this, man, but there's something in that house. It's blue and black and all twisted up, and it watches me sleep. Takes away any happiness I have, and I'm terrified I'm not going back in there." And this is a grown man claiming to see what we saw 20 years ago, not knowing her story. The third thing was, well, less something that we saw and more something that was just there. It would move things, knock things over, flush the toilets, turn on faucets, mess with electronics, etc. More of a nuisance than anything. One time Maddie was sleeping over at my house and she told me to quit tugging the blanket down. I told her I wasn't and to leave the blanket alone. We both felt a few more tugs before it flew off the end of the bed to the opposite wall. But things like this happen often. Slight TW. Don't know what TW stands for. Regardless, slight TW, the worst thing that was in the house, was not an entity. It was very much alive, and it was my father. I was 6 by this time, and he was heavy into many addictions. I can remember a time when he was good, but by this point he was my worst nightmare. He and his friends. I'll spare you the details, but, well, partially because I don't even remember it all. Although I'm not too upset about that. I do remember one time he had a couple of friends over and they were very far past the point of rational thought. I knew they were looking for me, and I also knew that they were finding me was the last thing that I ever wanted. There was a room in that house that I wasn't allowed in. It was less of a room and more of a boarded-in back porch. But it was where the laundry was. I asked my mom recently, and she said that I wasn't allowed because it wasn't safe. That house was apparently falling apart even then. That room was connected to the bathroom by a built-in cabinet that had a hole in the back of the bottom behind the doors. That way you could put a laundry basket in the bottom cabinet and reach through from the laundry room to grab it. That part was actually kind of cool. I remember seeing the little girl holding her hand out to me. I saw Tommy behind her and he nodded to me. So I let her lead me through the hole and into that room. I would have never gone on my own, and I wasn't a rule breaker by any means. She showed me a loose board, and I was able to push it out long enough to slip behind it. I could hear them calling for me, but she put her finger to her lips, a signal for me to be quiet. We stayed in that hole for a long time. I don't remember what happened next or how I got out, just that she never left me. I honestly don't know what would have happened if she hadn't helped me hide. I didn't even know that loose board was there, and neither did anyone else, I guess. Eventually got bored and went to hang out in my dad's truck until my mom and sister got home. More happened that I won't go into, but my sister, mom, and I moved out, and my grandparents and I was 7. So that would make this 2005, 2006. Not sure exactly. My dad had supervised visitation when he quickly lost, and things were good at Grandma's. I felt safe and stable, and I didn't see anything here, and I didn't miss Tommy. Or rather, I did. The ghost, not the father. About a year later, the summer before I went into 3rd grade, my mom remarried. The guy had a daughter 1 year older than me. My sister was 3, and we moved a couple hours away to another community, even smaller and more rural than the first one. I only lived in that house for a fall semester. They figured out pretty quickly that their marriage was a rebound for them both and they'd be better off apart. So I moved back in with Grandma at Christmas, since my mom was moving back in the summer anyway. I missed my old school so much. She had to stick it out until June being a teacher in a contract. So while we were living there, though, I felt like Karen from the Babysitters Club. I had my very own morbida destiny. Morbida? My friends from the street, the gravel back road, and I were convinced her neighborhood was a witch, or rather, her neighbor. Looking back, I doubt it. She had a grave in her backyard, but I'm sure it was part of a pet cemetery or something like this. We thought it was her husband, and I saw Tommy a lot living here. I think he knew I needed a friend. I remember one day we had a babysitter and we heard footsteps like always. She looked a little bit freaked out, and I told her, "Don't worry, that's just Tommy. He keeps the bad things away." After that, we played in the yard until my mom got home. I was scolded for scaring the babysitter. We were back with Grandma that summer until my mom met guy number 3. He was good when he was sober. The first time I knew he was bad was the time that I saw Tommy at the apartment we were living in now. He had been hitting the bottle all day, and the day ended with him breaking my mom's cell phone, screaming at us and not letting us leave. I was begging her to let me walk to the gas station across the street to call my grandma to come pick us up. "Please," I told her. You know, Grandma would let us stay again. I think at that point she was just so broken and embarrassed she wanted to stick it out and hope it got better. That sucks. And it did. In the morning, when he sobered up, but that seemed to be the trend for the next 6 years. That night, Tommy sat at the foot of my bed between me and the door. That was while they screamed at each other. Again, he held my gaze. I didn't know how long I stared into his brown eyes before I finally fell asleep. In 2009, we moved into the brick house. The brick house was where I spent most of my childhood. It's hard because I have so many good memories of the brick house, but it's also where I spent my darkest nights. That house came with entities of its own. There were the whisper people who lived in my sister's room and the bad thing. And the stepdad. The stepdad, like I said, was good most of the time, especially in the early days. We would have nights where we knew to keep our distance because, well, he'd been drinking the brown bag juice. But he was a decent guy. Didn't seem, though, that the worse he got, the more active the bad thing was. Drinking the brown bag juice. Ugh. I'll bring it back to the whisper people. My sister refused to sleep in her room. Our hallway was shaped like a backward 7 coming off from the living room. At the top of the 7, that was the bathroom. Perpendicular to that door was my mom's room. Then, beside the bathroom on the small line at the 7 was my room, initially. And on the top of that line of the 7 was my sister's. So her door faced my mom's. I hated standing in the small line of the 7. I always had a bad feeling. You could also see it from the bathroom mirror. I only made that mistake once. After that, I wouldn't look in that mirror until the door was completely closed. Anyway, my sister wouldn't sleep in her room, and she always said that the whisper people were too loud. She was in, pre-K or kindergarten when we first moved there, and she claimed she couldn't sleep because they whispered too loudly. One day I was coming out of the bathroom. I had just exited the door when I stopped. It was because I thought I heard something from her room. My mom's door was basically to my direct right, and about 6 or 7 feet to my left was hers. The noise stopped abruptly, and I thought it was weird. I waited a few seconds before I heard directly in my left ear an older lady's voice saying, "Shh, she'll hear you." And I booked it. I didn't think I've ever run so fast. It sounded like I was wearing an earbud. It was that close. I heard them a few other times, but I never did ever really stick around long enough to have them notice me again. Just ignore it became a trend in the house, and a trend or even a motto, like a philosophy. Whatever you want to call it, we just ignored it. Remember how I was talking about the bathroom mirror? Well, one day I was brushing my teeth and made the mistake of looking up. When I did, I saw a shadow, except it wasn't on the wall where the shadow should be. It was like a void in the middle of the hall, standing where a person would be. It was a shadow, but 3-dimensional, just standing there. It didn't have eyes that I could see, but I could feel it staring at me. And this is what I called the bad thing. The bad thing was much more powerful than anything I'd ever experienced. My mom coined it the hallway walker because she said she could hear it pacing the hallway at night. I quickly moved out of the renovated garage as my bedroom, or moved out into it, rather. We had walled it in, added a window, added insulation and drywall. It was like any other room in the house, and it was huge. It was a kid's dream space. It was also generally free from the entities, and for some reason they stayed at the other end of the house, and I was grateful for this. The bad thing had this ability to play back her voices. I remember sitting in the living room with my mom being the only one in the home, and we heard my voice from her bedroom saying, "Mommy, come here." We both looked at each other and she shook her head. Behind her, you'll never guess who was standing there. Tommy. He did the same as her. He shook his head back and forth slowly. "Mommy," we heard, "I need you." Our show was paused and we sat in complete silence. I watched Tommy walk down the hall toward her bedroom, and we heard it a third time. "Mommy, And then it stopped. I don't know what Tommy did, but he stopped it. We felt the air shift, and we both took a deep breath. "Do you think it's gone?" I asked her. "For now," she told me. And she was right, it was gone, but it always came back. This is just one example. We heard our own and each other's voices all the time. I was constantly keeping tabs on where everyone was in the house. I don't want to know what would have happened if I had listened and followed it somewhere alone. By the time I was a freshman in high school, which is 2012-2013, I spent my ride home from school playing that stepdad was already passed out in the recliner, or praying. It was a good night if he was, and sure, we would tiptoe, keep to our rooms, but at least I didn't have to deal with him yelling, cussing, and hitting things. I feel ya. On the unlucky nights, we did have to endure his drunken stupors. It seemed the bad thing would be more active. He'd show up around corners, talk more, move things, and generally cast a dark, heavy cloud over the house, much like the twisty man. He had a talent for sucking all the happiness out of an area. But on nights like these, Tommy would be there, always silent, letting me know that it would be okay. My other best friend, who later became my college roommate and godmother of my son, was over one night. Stepdad was God knows where, doing God knows what, but it had been a good night. We'd rented movies, waited for my dog to stop barking, eating more than our fill of pizza. We'd spent the last couple of hours talking about boys and gossip. She went to the bathroom, and when she came back, she seemed uneasy. I asked what was wrong, and dude, what's up with your stepdad? Where did he go anyway? I looked out the window of my room, which overlooked the driveway. Truck wasn't there. Still gone, I told her. No, I just saw some guy in your kitchen, and he was wearing a suit, she told me. Then she went on to describe Tommy to a T. A few minutes later, we heard the front door bang open and my stepdad stumble in throughout the house. He finally grumbled his way to his and my mom's bedroom and slammed the door. That was him, I told her. Then who the fuck did I see in your kitchen? She asked. I explained the whole thing to her, knowing that Tommy had always been there to guard me and seemed to show up whenever I needed protection or comfort. Oh, like an angel. Cool. That's all she said. She went on to see him for about 4 more times when we lived together. I also had 3 other friends who stayed over describing the man they saw, sitting at the table on the couch and leaning against a doorway, all with the same description of the middle-aged man with brown hair and eyes and a dark blue suit. On the last night, I truly didn't know if I'd make it out of that house. We refer to it as the last night because it was the last night that we had to see Stepdad. I was 16 and I was done. The situation with him had just hit a breaking point. What was once just him stomping around and being intimidating to assert his dominance had turned into something physical. Side note for anybody hearing this story, if you do share this, please don't stay just because it isn't physical. If they're acting like that, it will escalate at some point. Just because it's all been verbal until this point doesn't mean it won't absolutely change in the future. Get out before it does. Pretty good advice. On this night, the doors were all locked. He'd taken our phones and he was marching back and forth spewing nonsense about how he demanded respect. I snuck my sister into my room and hid her in my closet. I barricaded the bedroom door and I put headphones on her and played her favorite songs on my iPod so she couldn't hear him banging and yelling for me to open up and come out. Part of me was so tired. Part of me wanted to just give him what he wanted. Part of me thought that even if the worst happened, I'd finally be free of this. So tired I didn't want to be unalived, which I truly believe to this day that's how the night should have ended. But I just couldn't do it anymore. But then I saw Tommy. He pointed to the drawer on my vanity. It hardly ever went in there, and it had become my junk drawer. What? I asked. He pointed again. I sighed and walked over to it, still hearing the banging and yelling on my door. Sitting there on the top of my journals and old Camp Pen Pal letters was my cell phone. The very cell phone that had been confiscated earlier in the night. To this day, I have no idea how it got in that drawer. It wasn't the first time things had seemed to teleport in that house, though. But it was the first time I was so grateful for the weird shit I'd experienced my whole life. I took it out and I called my aunt. I don't really know why, but she was the first one I thought of. She worked with law enforcement and I knew that she would know what to do. She always did. She called the police on my uncle's phone and they were there within minutes. I brought my sister out of the closet so we could watch our stepdad finally be arrested for the 6 years of hell that we'd gone through. I hugged her and looked over her shoulder to make eye contact with Tommy again. "Thank you," I told him. After it was just the three of us in the house, bills got to be a lot. My mom was a teacher, after all, and really wasn't lucrative even in 2015. I had a cousin who had just had a bad breakup and needed a fresh start. She lived about 15 hours away. She was 26 at the time. She and my mom decided that she would move in and help out with us girls and pay a small amount of the rent. That way it would wind up being beneficial to everyone. So she came to live with us. She moved into the room that, had been mine initially, beside the bathroom. I remember after a few weeks of her living there, she'd asked me, "Did you ever sleep with the door open when you stayed in my room?" I laughed and told her, "Hell no. Why?" She'd asked me, "Did it stare at you all night too, the shadow thing?" Once stepdad left, the activity did die down a lot, but it was still prevalent. I remember one time I got home from school and my friend had dropped me off and my cousin's car was in the driveway. I'd come inside, called out her name, and I'd heard her voice say, "Back here," clear as day. I had something I'd wanted to tell her, so I'd practically sprinted to her room only to find it empty. Thought maybe she was in my mom's room, the bathroom, my sister's room, or I searched. She was nowhere. I was annoyed. Thought that she was hiding from me. I called her and she sounded confused. "I'm at the grocery store with your mom." "What are you on about?" "We'll be home in like 20 minutes. We're about to check out." I'd heard her voice call to me, but she wasn't there, and whatever had used her voice had gotten me in the house alone. I felt the air grow cold and ran into the front yard, passing Tommy on the way. He was passing me in the hall on his way to her room. Didn't even stay to see what was going to happen. I sat in the driveway until they got home. Things went on like this for the next maybe year and a half. During this time, my cousin had moved in with her now wife, and my now dad had moved in. He's a fantastic guy. He adopted me a couple of years ago, and I may have been 24, married, and a mom, but it was important for me that he is my dad legally. He's in my heart anyway. We sold that house the summer before I went to college, and we all moved across the state. We all needed a fresh start. We needed out of that town that held so many horrible memories. We needed to be able to go out in public without watching over our shoulders. So I chose where I wanted to go, and they moved too. They lived about 45 minutes from the university, which was pretty nice. I was able to go and see them on weekends, but still have my independence. Having my independence and safety, though, turned out to be a curse as much as it was a blessing. Now that I was finally safe, my mind decided I was in a place to process some of the trauma I'd experienced when I was younger. I started remembering things that had been pushed to the back of my mind and tucked away. I was waking up nightly screaming. Every night, Tommy was at the foot of my bed staring at me with his big brown soft eyes until my breathing calmed and I could sleep again, even though that was the last thing I wanted to do. Having these night terrors invaded every aspect of my life. My grades fell, I wasn't doing the best of my job, and it had been weeks since I'd slept well. The last straw was when I was horsing around with a friend from our friend group. It was my best friend from before, another girl, two of our best guy friends, and myself all in our dorm. I'd taken something from one of our guy friends as a joke and was dangling it around, teasing him. He was reaching for it, trying to get it back, and somehow I ended up pinned between him and a wall. It wasn't being violent at all, just playful, but something about that, though, sent me off. I don't even remember what happened. I just remember coming to, crouched on the floor, and they were all looking at me very concerned. They told me I'd started crying, shouting nonsense, and hyperventilating. The next day, my best friend and the guy friend I'd been playing with brought me to the counseling center. It was then that I started to see a therapist. We talked through it, and I started anxiety medication not long after, and life was good. Still had my nightmares, but they were getting further and further apart. Tommy was always there at night to sit on the foot of my bed and look at me until I fell back asleep. Knowing that he was there did make me feel better. I saw him one more time while I was in college after the nightmare stopped. I was pumping gas at a gas station about a quarter-mile away from the university. It was the last building before a long bridge and then our school. I had just gotten back to my car when a guy around my age came up to my passenger window holding his student ID. "Hey, ma'am," he said to me. "I know this is weird, but I really need to ride. I need to ride back to school. My friends ditched me, and I see your parking pass. Are you going back right now?" My window was down slightly because it was a nice night, and at least down far enough for me to hear him. Not enough for me to, or rather for him to reach inside, so... Honestly, he was kind of cute and he seemed genuine. I was about to say yes when I made eye contact with someone in my back seat. It startled me. It was Tommy, and he was shaking his head at me. I turned back to the guy who was reaching for my passenger door handle, and I felt a firm grip on my shoulder and made eye contact with Tommy one more time. He had a serious look in his face. He was shaking his head even harder. I said, "No, sorry," locked the doors, sped away, and could hear him shouting at me as I pulled out. Held my breath the whole way. I could feel the hand on my shoulder the whole time, and when I put my car in park, I collapsed onto my steering wheel and sucked in a deep breath. My lungs were burning at that point. I felt the hand leave and looked into the rearview mirror. The back seat was empty. I spent the next few hours in what felt like a whirlwind. I moved cities, transferred schools, got engaged and married, even had a baby. Tommy would show up randomly when I'd have nightmares, and a couple of times when loved ones sadly passed. The night my uncle, who was one of my only positive male role models, so we were close. When they passed, my phone rang, and it was my mom. I looked over and I saw Tommy on the couch by me, looking at me sadly. He knew before I did. He was there until my husband got home a few minutes later. Occasionally, Tommy would show up just to check on me, it seems. My husband had seen him a couple of times, but he was cool with it. He's had his own experiences with the paranormal and believed me right away. The first time he saw him, it was after a nightmare. I woke up to Tommy on the foot of my bed, and a minute later my husband jumped up out of the bed and said, "What the fuck?" Honestly, can't blame him. But I explained everything, and he took it surprisingly well, considering there was just a man in his bed. One day, we're in the car. I'd run into the store to grab a few things while he sat in the car keeping the heater on. When I got out, he told me, "Hey, your friend came to for a visit or something." Must have looked confused because he said, "Your ghost friend Tommy, he was in the back seat. I just said that you weren't here right now, and I also told him that you were safe and thanks for taking care of you all those years." He kind of just stared at me for a minute and then went away. That was the last time either of us saw Tommy for a year or so. The next time, and the last time, was right after I had my son. He was maybe 2 or 3 weeks old at that point, and I was walking to the nursery to check on him. I stopped short because standing over the crib was a man in a dark blue suit. He turned to look at me and looked like he had tears in his eyes. He looked between my son and me a couple times and gave me a smile. "He's cute, isn't he?" I asked. "You aren't leaving, are you? I mean, I'll still see you, right?" He just looked at me. "Thanks for keeping me safe," I told him. He looked back at my son, looked at me like how a parent looks at their child as they cross the sort of graduation stage. He seemed proud of me, but he didn't answer. The look he gave made my heart swell, something deep down, like I knew that would be the last time I saw his kind brown eyes. Then my son cried, and I tore my gaze away from the man who had kept me safe my whole childhood. When I looked back to the space where Tommy had been, he was gone. There have been times where I think maybe I made it all up. Maybe Tommy was like my way of coping. Maybe he was part of a decades-long psychosis or a trauma-induced apparition. But then I think of all the other people who saw him too. Maybe he was really there. Maybe he was an ancestor of mine. Maybe he was a guardian angel. All I know is I don't think I'd be here today if it wasn't for my imaginary friend. I'm 26 now, and I have 2 loving parents who are the best grandparents ever. I have a husband who I love more than anything, and an almost 3-year-old who keeps me on my toes. He's so smart, gives me the best hugs. He's growing into such a funny kid, and I love being his mom. Haven't seen Tommy since that day, but sometimes I think I can feel a hand on my shoulder or eyes watching me the way that he always would. Lately, my son's been smiling and waving at the dark hallway and talking to someone in his closet. He calls him Blue Man. Never seems afraid, and maybe it's an imaginary friend. Maybe he has his own guardian angel, or maybe, just maybe, Tommy kept me safe as long as he could. Now he's watching over my baby. If it really is him, I know he's in good hands. A Malaysian Chinese ghost story. This happened in the late 1990s to me. During the Asian financial crisis, the lack of jobs caused me to move out of my hometown of Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. I moved north along the Penang to start my career as an accountant, Will Dell. Maybe with Dell? I rented a room with an old lady in an old part of Penang called Gelugor. Imagine an area with old Chinese and English colonial houses, many of which being well over 100 years old. So, Penang is an island that was colonized by the British government in the 1800s. Malaysia is in the Southeast Asia just above Singapore. Being a young person and Dell going through an exciting startup stage in Asia, the work was pretty interesting, but it was also demanding. It's not uncommon for me to work at the Dell headquarters and return home past midnight. In Chinese culture, there's a ghost festival called the Hungry Ghost Festival. This occurs in August, and the story goes that ghosts and our ancestors come and visit the living during this period, and we often put out food for them. Anyway, one night when I was working late a few days before the start of the festival, I encountered this strange event. I usually parked my car across the road from the house where I was renting a room. When I got out of my car, I saw this very old man with dark, weathered skin, slowly cycling towards me. Now, this was very late in a very quiet part of town, and in my many months of me working late, I've never encountered a single person this late in the day. This was so unusual to start with, and then he stopped in front of me and spoke. Hokkien. Hokkien. A local Chinese dialect which I was still trying to pick up then. I didn't quite understand him, so I answered my standard way in such encounters in Penang by asking whether he was conversing in Mandarin, the official Chinese language, and instead he asked if I could understand English, which I then replied that I could. As clear as today, he asked the following question in English. Do you know where people go die? I remember being shocked and stammered back with an apology and replied that I didn't know. With that, he nodded and nonchalantly cycled slowly away. I quickly entered my house, the full sense of shock hitting me and noticing that it was midnight then. Locked myself into my room, peeking out into the street with a pounding heart. Took some time before I could get to sleep, and to this day I can't fathom whether that was really something paranormal. For another year of working very late many days, I've never encountered another soul whenever I return home. Let me get this straight. It was Ghost Festival time, and you bumped into somebody that asked where dead people go. My apartment might be haunted. In August, I made the big move from the East Coast to the West Coast. I managed to find a decent apartment in a not-so-great area, but I was excited at least to settle in. My friend agreed to be my roommate, so I moved in a week early. first few nights felt off. Kinda was getting this eerie sense that somebody was watching me. And every night around 2:30 a.m., I'd hear footsteps. I brushed it off as stress from the move, thinking maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. When my roommate arrived, things seemed normal for about a week. Then one night we both heard tapping and footsteps at the same time. We chalked it up to noisy neighbors upstairs, but for me, things got a little weirder. The doors started shutting off on their own. One time while I was in the bathroom with the door wide open, it suddenly slammed shut. Figured it was just a draft, or maybe the door was heavy. Well, when I opened it again, it stayed perfectly still. Another time, while I was in my room playing video games, my door just shut by itself. I brought it up to my roommate, and he was pretty dismissive, but he seemed that he would often hear odd sounds late at night again, precisely around 2:30 a.m. And on top of all of this, I've been feeling like unusually drained. My girlfriend and I fight more often when we're at my place over small, insignificant things. It's like a cloud of negativity has settled over me, and I can't shake it. This never used to happen. So, what should I do? I don't really like feeling this way, and I certainly don't want to be, keep up the crankiness. Stalked in the woods. A couple of days ago, my boyfriend and I went camping in East Germany. We had found an incredible spot to set up our tent. It was right by a river in the woods. We parked the car about 20 meters away from us behind a bush. After we set everything up, we sat by the river and enjoyed the sunset. It was getting darker, and we could hear the animals around us getting more active. We were well aware that we would hear some creepy noises at night. Anyway, my boyfriend decided to bring our food to the car to not attract any more animals at night, so I stayed at our spot enjoying the view. As soon as he walked out to the car, this strange feeling got to me. A feeling of fear and alertness. I kept checking on my boyfriend, who jokingly said something like, "Please keep looking after me," which is also untypical for him. Maybe it's worth to mention that neither him nor I are easily scared. We're both tough and had a knife with us too. When he got back to our spot, he kneeled down next to me and said, "I heard something really heavy walking in those woods." I thought he was joking, trying to scare me, but he was serious. I could see how uneasy he was, and he said that we should have a look with the knife and flashlights. So we did. About halfway to the car, I could hear it too. Some really heavy footsteps. First I thought, oh, well, a deer. But not soon after, I noticed that it clearly sounded like bipedal footsteps. In that moment, I got the chills, and I felt an insane moment of panic. We stood there, frozen, staring into the woods. When we moved, it moved. When we stood still, it stood still. It clearly mocked our steps that went on for about 2 minutes. "We've had enough." I rushed back to the tent as my boyfriend stood guard with the knife on hold. I grabbed everything valuable and necessary, and we rushed to the car. As I grabbed the stuff, I could still hear it moving in the bushes. As soon as we were in the car, we locked the door and drove off to gain some distance. We parked the car in the parking lot and talked about what had just happened. My boyfriend said that when he bought the food to the car, he already had a weird gut feeling of something or someone lurking. The reason for him asking me to keep checking on him. As soon as he had heard the steps, he said he literally got chills down his whole spine. He also saw some sort of vague outline of something, but couldn't identify anything really. He's never felt more altered and panicked his whole life. Neither did I. It was pure survival and gut instincts to get away from whatever it was in the bush. He slept in the car that night. Now, he thinks it was a creepy human who was up to no good. I think it was, well, at least a possibility. But I think it might be something different. Do you guys have any ideas on what might have been apart from it being human? We don't have any large predators in Germany, only wolves, which they're pretty rare, and they're not bipedal. Bride's Pool. Nestled within the scenic Plover Cove Country Park in the New Territories, Bride's Pool is a picturesque waterfall with a tragic history that's given rise to one of Hong Kong's most chilling urban legends. It was during a stormy evening many years ago when a young bride was being carried to her wedding in a traditional sedan chair. Sedan? Like a car? The path to her groom's home was treacherous, made more perilous by the heavy rain. As the porters struggled to navigate the slippery trail, one of them lost his footing. The bride, still seated in the chair, was hurled into the pool below. Despite frantic efforts to save her, the waters claimed her, and her body was never found. In memory of the tragic event, the family was named Bride's Pool, or rather the place. The name serves as a somber reminder of the young bride's untimely fate, forever linking the serene waters with sorrow and loss. Locals and visitors alike have reported eerie encounters at Bride's Pool. Some say the bride's restless spirit lingers in the water, forever searching for her lost love. On misty nights, sightings of a woman in a red cheong sam, a traditional attire meant to empower the spirit for revenge, brushing her hair by the pool. This has been reported. Her mournful presence casts a shadow over the otherwise tranquil scenery. Adding to the location's sinister reputation is Bride's Pool Road, a nearby roadway notorious for frequent accidents. Many vehicles involved in these crashes are curiously red, echoing the color of the bride's cheongsam. It's said that the spirit's unrest may influence the mishaps, as if seeking vengeance or recognition. The government, aware of the area's flooding risk, has refrained from building direct trails to Bride's Pool. Visitors must brave the climb up the stream bed to reach the falls, adding an element of surprise and danger and adventure to the journey. The isolation of the pool contributes to its eerie atmosphere, particularly for those who dare to visit after dark. Despite the ghostly tales, Bride's Pool remains a popular destination. It's known for its 15-meter waterfall and clear plunge pool. It stands as a testament to the beauty of nature intertwined with the poignant echoes of a haunted past. This is very AI-sounding. In the bustling cityscape of modern Hong Kong, tales of Bride's Pool and its haunted past remain a tragic, or rather topic, of intrigue and fear. Despite the chilling legends, the natural beauty of the place continued to draw visitors, including thrill seekers and those curious about the supernatural. Mai Ling, an adventurous young woman with a fascination for urban legends, decided to visit Bride's Pool with her friends one weekend. They planned a hiking trip to the scenic waterfall, eager to see if the stories held any truth. Equipped with cameras and a sense of excitement, they made their way to Plover Cove County Park. Plover Cove. The hike was challenging. No direct trails leading to the pool. They had to climb up the stream bed, which added to the sort of sense of adventure. As they approached Bride's Pool, the serene sound of the waterfall grew louder, and the beauty of the place took their breath away. As they set up a picnic near the water, Mai Ling couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. She chalked it up to nerves, but the sensation persisted. She decided to explore the area alone, her curiosity getting the better of her. Wandering along the edge of the pool, Mai Ling noticed a subtle drop in temperature. Despite the sunny day, the air around the water felt strangely cold. She shivered and continued her walk, her eyes scanning for any sign of the supernatural. Suddenly, she heard a faint sound, almost like a whisper. She paused, trying to locate the source. The whispering grew louder, and she realized it was coming from the water. Peering into the pool, she saw a ripple disturb the surface, as if something had moved beneath it. Her heart raced as she saw the figure of a woman in a red cheongsam emerging from the depths. The woman's hair was wet, clinging to her pale face. Mai Ling's breath caught in her throat as the woman's sorrowful eyes locked onto hers. It was the bride, the spirit from the legend. In a trance, Mai Ling felt herself drawn toward the water. Just as she was about to step in, a strong hand grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back. It was her friend, Wei, who had come looking for her. "What are you doing?" Wei asked, his voice filled with concern. Mai Ling blinked, snapping out of the trance. The apparition was gone, and the water was calm once more. Trembling, she recounted what she had seen. Wei, sensing the seriousness of the situation, suggested that they leave immediately. As they packed up and hurried back, the unease didn't leave Mai Ling. She could still feel the bride's eyes watching her. They reached the end of the trail just as the sun began to set, leaving the haunted pool behind. Back in the safety of her home, Mai Ling researched the legend in more detail. She discovered that the spirit of the bride was said to seek vengeance on those who disturbed her rest. The red cheongsam, traditionally worn for weddings and things of the sort, they're also believed to be worn by those who seek revenge from the afterlife. Though Mai Ling's encounter left her shaken, she shared her story in a warning to others. The legends of Bride's Pool were not just stories. They were a reminder of the tragic past that lingered and of spirits that still roamed the waters, waiting for the next unsuspecting visitor. Fingers crossed for no AI in the next one. I guess I'm going crazy. New guy here. Well, I never imagined there'd be a subreddit of this type since I don't use Reddit a lot, but let's say my name is Hyuga. I've had schizophrenia from a very young age. I didn't realize what it was till I was about 15. I'm the type of guy who gets mad when I get scared, so I guess it never really bothered me a lot. But after all these years now, I know if what I see is actually in my head or happening in real life. First time I had an actual paranormal encounter was during my maternal uncle's wedding. I was like 12 or something, I don't really remember much. But I had had exams the next day, and it was an hour drive from the wedding to my school. In our tradition, both the bride and groom host the wedding party in their respective homes during the day, and at nighttime the families and friends of the groom go to the bride's place to pick her up after some rituals. Only if not done in a marriage hall. So I had exams. I stayed back with my mom and a few others. I don't remember the time, but it was well past midnight. I was alone in my room, so I pretended to study and I was playing games on my mom's phone. The windows were open and so were the doors, but there were people all around, and that's when I heard it. Somebody called me by my actual name. Everybody in my mom's place called me by my nicknames, and nobody would ever call me by my real name. I didn't pay much attention, and I was gaming. That one voice kept calling my name, and it was coming from the window. I checked it just to find no one. Soon after I looked away from the window, the voice starts coming from another window. When I checked the window out there was no one. Had an urge to go outside, but I'm not too dumb to go. I don't recall what happened after that, though. Second, that happened when I was 14. And actually, a lot happened when I was 14. My schizophrenia worsened due to me constantly using drugs. There's a small and broken clubhouse a few shops away from my school in the weekly marketplace. Me and my friends used to smoke there to hide from people. That day I was alone, so I stayed by the corner and I started smoking. That's where no one could see me. The walls were a little bit broken, the window and doors only had their frames. It was around noon and I'd heard somebody call my name again. It was a whisper, and I heard it say, Hyuga. Hyuga Kesa. Kesa refers to, like, whatever you're having at the time. It might be coffee or food or even a cigarette or a bottle of beer. I was shocked and scared, thinking somebody found me smoking. Quickly threw the cigarette away and looked around to see who it was. Surprisingly, there was no one. Normally there's people bringing water to their cows and goats during this time, but that time there was no one. And when I say no one, there's literally no one. The walls were broken, so I could see the other side too. I thought it was my head and got back to smoking another cigarette. Heard the same whisper. Said the same thing. I ignored it and I felt like the whisper was coming close to me. That's when I decided it was time to wrap it up and leave. So I did. Every now and then I keep hearing voices and I see stuff around me. But I know it's all in my head no matter what I see or hear because I don't feel any kind of presence. Third time I actually saw a dead person. The person nearby my home has just passed away due to an old age, and a week later his wife also passed away due to the death of her beloved. I know people's names and faces, but somehow I always manage to forget them. Like I knew this person died, but I forget what they looked like. During this time, we used to go jogging as early as 3 a.m. with my friends. I used to go just so I could smoke peacefully in the morning. So this happened a week later and the lady died. I got dressed up, my dad unlocked the gate and went back to sleep. Brought my lighter and cigarettes with me and started walking. I only went to smoke, so I never really, jogged as much. After walking past a few homes, I meet the lady, I hide my cigarette, and I greet her. I forgot that she had passed away, and I continued to walk past her. She just looked at me, smiled, and walked past. Thought I got ignored, so I continued smoking. After passing a few homes, I remembered her name. I remembered that she was no more. I was scared and annoyed at the same time. The scared I get equals the angrier I get. I decided to look back, and sure enough, she wasn't there. I decided to fuck it and sprint straight to my friends. This is my last and latest encounter from the last year. My grandpa's younger brother, also my grandpa, passed away. In our tradition, all the family members except the far-related children fast for the first 3 days. After the first 3 days, we burn the body. We're allowed to eat one meal at a time. Only boiled food with no oil or anything. Whatever we eat has to be boiled for the next 4 days. After the 4 days, depending on the family, you get to eat twice a day, except for the direct family members. Only boiled food until either 14 days after the person has passed or 17 days or even a month depending on the family's decision. No meat is allowed during these days and all food has to be boiled only. I broke this rule on the 14th day. We were supposed to wait 17 days. No. I went out with a very close friend of mine to buy him a laptop. Well, that's nice. And while returning back, we stopped by a cafe. The food was too tempting, and I decided to break the tradition, and after the 17th day, we feed everyone who attend the rituals, and on the 18th, we feed everyone who helped with the work and rituals. That day, we were fed mutton. After the dinner, it was only 8 p.m., and everyone was sitting by the yard talking about stuff. I was out on the street talking to a friend about a ride the next day. My place is next to a place of my grandpa's death. The street was dark, and I was alone talking to my friend about where we were going to go for a drink. After a few moments, I hear someone cutting a bamboo tree. There was a bamboo grove behind me, so I thought somebody was actually cutting it. We absolutely do not cut any kind of plant after dark, and we forgot about it. The sounds grew more and more loud. I asked my friends if he had some noise in the background. He said no. So I just looked back, and there was no one, turned back again to continue the conversation. This time, the hearing sounds again, but only louder, every second. I felt something really heavy on my back, as if someone was pulling me down. I was scared to look behind, so I didn't. After a few moments, I felt a cold hand near my cheek. I turned around and the voices and the presence was gone. So I ran straight to my uncle, got the keys from him, and ran straight to my room. We were taught since a young age that no harmless spirit will ever approach you, and if something approaches you, it's probably not the best idea to find out what it is. So that's what I do a lot. Saved or just lucky? A few years back, my boyfriend and I were in a bad accident. I was driving my Jeep Cherokee and we stopped for gas, and I thought I heard a whisper say, "back tire." I cocked my head and stopped, listening for it to repeat. It did. I told my boyfriend. He shrugged and said that we'd get it looked at tomorrow. We filled the tank, hopped on the interstate, just headed a couple exits down to the hotel. It was dark and just starting to rain when we hit a puddle and pretty much just hydroplaned. I'm a pretty experienced defensive driver, so I let slowly off the gas and steered through. We headed for the center wall. I turned the wheel and overcorrected, and I did this in time. We didn't hit the wall. We spun around a few times across the highway, but when the Jeep stopped, we were in the shoulder facing oncoming traffic. I was looking at headlights coming down the highway. I took a breath and looked to my boyfriend before we could say anything. The world went dark. Suddenly, we were flipping tail over nose. Wrapped my arms and knees around the steering wheel and held on. I had my eyes open the whole time, but I saw none of the headlights I had seen a few minutes ago. It was like someone wrapped me in a blanket, an oddly warm and protected feeling. I'm not gonna lie, I was scared as hell, but I knew I would be alright. When we stopped flipping, we were upside down, still in the shoulder. One of the cars had come past as we were flipping. One of the first passerbys stopped and said that she saw the whole thing. From her point of view, we drifted toward the center wall, turned suddenly and spun 3 times toward the shoulder, then flipped 4 times, tail over nose. She thought we would have been dead. We were both fine, not even a scratch from broken glass. When we inspected the Jeep the next day, all the side windows were intact and rolled up, and the roof was crushed to the seats. The windshield and back window were shattered. One back tire was blown. I still get cold chills thinking about that night. I absolutely refused to drive in bad weather or darkness. Do you think we were saved by something, or was my choice of vehicle what kept us safe? They do have a roll bar, which definitely saved you. Unexplained knocking. So this actually freaked me out when it happened. A couple of days ago, I was in the bathroom doing bathroom things. Elegant. Door was closed. My brother and I are just talking through it, and that's while he feeds the cats. I hear him walk away, and maybe 5 to 10 seconds later I hear 2 distinct knocks on the door. 2 quick raps. Knock, knock. Immediately I say, "What?" No response, so I repeat myself louder. "What?" Thought it was my brother. He acts deaf sometimes, so after no response again, I yelled, "What?" Then I hear him from across the house, asking something along the lines of what or what did I say? Immediately I'm like, what the fuck? If he's in the kitchen, who knocked? I yelled to him, asked if it was him that knocked, and he says no. I mentioned in other posts that my brother, who's 16, is not a prankster. He doesn't play jokes or mess around, despite being a 16-year-old boy, so he says he didn't do something. I tend to believe it. I'm freaking out at this point and leave the bathroom. Then I spend, Luke 5 minutes messing around with the bathroom door and try to debunk it. He's a skeptic and realist, whatever you want to call it. So mind you, we were home alone. We would just get home from school. Mom and stepdad at work, youngest brother at biological dad's place. It was just us 2. We have pets, but a human knuckle knocking and a cat paw or dog paw against the door are very different sounds. This was a human. We tried to figure out what it could be. I was kind of low-key panicking, but couldn't think of anything except him thinking I'm crazy and me convinced even more that we have ghosts. Can someone help? So I wanted to start by saying that I lived in Hemet my whole life. I recently moved out and I've been thinking about all of the paranormal things I've experienced. This one has to top the creepiest, and I wanted to share it with you guys to maybe see if you guys have seen this thing before or have heard of it. It was the summer of 2019. I had just graduated. Spent a lot of time with my friends driving around at night, and, well, one night my friend A, who I'm going to call Adam, was driving me home. We were having a good time listening to music and talking. My house was in this neighborhood that was literally a full rectangle, so in order to get to my house, you'd have to take a right, a left, then another left, and boom, my house would be in the middle on the left. So, my friend's driving, she takes a right, and at the very end of the street was this tall, lanky, gray, hunched-over creature, and it's running. While it's running, it turns left down the next street. At this point, A and I look at each other and ask each other what the hell that was. She continues to drive. She took the next left, and we see it again, but further now, taking another left toward my house. We both began to flip out, not knowing what it was, creeped out, but also curious. As we made the final left turn toward my house, it was no longer there. We took a couple laps around my block to see if we could find it again, but nothing and nobody was there. I've heard of skinwalkers looking like, well, sort of like that, but it looked like the werewolf from Harry Potter the way it ran. Still creeps me out to this day. Does anybody know what it could have been or seen something similar? I think a spirit was trying to reach out to me. Recently, my family and I, 21-year-old female, stayed in a small house in rural Ireland that we booked an Airbnb. We traveled maybe 2 hours to get there, and on the way to the house, my mom got a call from the owner. She got a call about where she left the keys for us. She mentioned that it was her parents' house, and after they passed, she couldn't bring herself to sell it. So she rents it to holiday goers. Cool. Never thought anything else of it again. We arrived late that evening, and I was pretty tired. So after we went for a meal, I went up to bed around 11:30. It was a beautiful old house, and I didn't get any bad vibes. I fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow, basically. But this is where it gets weird. Around 4:30 a.m., I wake up and instantly I just feel this very uneasy feeling. Went on my phone until around 5, decided I should get back to sleep. But when I lay down, I started getting these loud thoughts in my head. The names Bobby and Grace were repeating constantly in my head. They were so loud that I couldn't get back to sleep. Just Grace, Bobby, Bobby, Grace, over and over until I eventually fell back asleep. We went out for drinks the next evening. I was telling my sister what had happened and how weirded out I was by it. Later that evening, when we got back to the house, we sat in the kitchen all night playing cards. At one point, I went to the one cupboard to look for something, and I found this huge old Bible. Like it was ancient and really freaky looking. We looked through the pages filled with what we assumed were previous owners' signatures, some dating back to as far as the 1920s. After about 15 minutes, we flicked to a page, and signed at the bottom is Robert. Let's say the last name was Mills, and it said Boston, 1935. Then it clicked. Bobby is short for Robert. It wasn't even one signature. There were so many pages with that name written on it. We freaked out, put the Bible back where I found it. Never found the name Grace, but I'd like to know if this is just a weird coincidence. I don't know really what to think, so if anybody could shed some light on this experience, I'd appreciate it. I saw a ghost for the first time. Can anyone offer me some insight? I, a 23-year-old female, am just back from a trip to Krakow. I had an amazing time. Whoa. Sorry, that's a brutal sentence. If you're older than 23, that's a brutal sentence. It's a beautiful city rich with wartime history. During World War II, the city was divided into quarters, two of which being the Jewish quarter and later on the ghetto, established in 1941 just outside of the city center. This is the area in which we were staying. After spending our first day in the old town, I decided to get an early night as we had a long day of traveling. Despite being extremely tired, I had a very broken night's sleep. After managing to fall into a deep sleep, I woke up around 2 and I was shocked at what I encountered. My boyfriend was sleeping beside me in bed and I was facing his back. As my eyes slowly drifted open, I noticed what looked like a small girl, maybe 6 or 7, lying between us in bed. She was facing me. Both of her hands covered her face almost as if she was playing peekaboo. Couldn't see her features, but I could see her blonde hair, and it was cut in a bob style, with a short fringe across her forehead. For what I could make out, she wasn't wearing any clothes, and her hands small and pale, and when I fully awoke, I realized what I was seeing. I turned to the other side of the bed. I wasn't really afraid, but I didn't want to look at her. It was as if she was hiding. I didn't speak about her to my boyfriend or anyone else the whole trip, as I was afraid that mentioning her would make her appear again. I didn't feel like having another nightly visit. I just want to know why she would appear to me, especially in that pose. It's like she didn't want to be seen. One can only imagine. See ya.